Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Finch Fulton, Vice President of Policy and Strategy, Locomation. Welcome to the podcast, Finch.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to have you here. You have an incredible mind into policy. You have all the insights to back it up. You have the research and the knowledge. I can't wait to dive into this conversation because policy is going to play a large role in the future of autonomy, especially as we go into the midterm elections in 2022. As we turn the calendar to 2022, what trends are you expecting to emerge in the autonomous trucking industry?
Yeah, so I think we're for sure going to see more demonstrations, on-road, public road demonstrations, more strategic partnerships announced, more investments announced. But I think you're still going to see very limited actual commercial deployment. Any company seeking to engage in interstate commerce, unless you have a human in the vehicle, is essentially going to be banned. So you'll see people proving that the technology can work, but because of the different tack the US DOT has taken on their rulemakings, I think you're going to see some key rulemakings delayed by research, and this will actually delay the ability of companies to remove the drivers out of the operation of the autonomous vehicle for many years.
Is this the White House playing politics to protect their labor interests?
I mean, it's interesting. I wouldn't assert that. I think it's very much just as a different approach to how you regulate. You see, from a right of center government, it's very much about what the end goal is and not being sort of prescriptive on the requirements. If you have a performance-based goal, such as saying you have to ensure that the vehicle can be visible on the road for other road users so that no one crashes into a vehicle that's broken down on the side of the road, the Republicans would say the goal is to put out markers, make sure you ensure visibility. If you do that, you'll be in compliance. The Democrats seem to be taking the approach of saying, we're going to do the research, we're going to make sure that we figure out the only ways that you're allowed to do it, and we'll go through a multi-year rulemaking process to say, here's how you do it. When you prove that you can do it this way, that's when you'll be in compliance. So it's much more prescriptive, is much more about saying that you have to comply with the way they see it, and it's less flexible, and it allows industry less ability to determine the best answers for their own product and their own use case. So I think it's just as much a different in governance philosophy as anything else.
The way they see it, they're politicians and they have staff, but they're not experts in trucking. They're not experts in autonomy. Where's the input coming from to ensure that the United States continue to lead on this technology?
Well, we are seeing, in this last year, we've seen a limited amount of input derived from industry partners, from organized labor, from anybody. There hasn't been that much work, certainly not at the pace that you'd seen in the past. We're told that this year things should pick up. And so, especially as it comes with issues that can touch labor impacts, I mean, the White House recently announced a big initiative to have the Department of Transportation and Department of Labor a Driving Good Jobs initiative, which they're going to have listening sessions around the country that bring on drivers, unions, industry, and advocates. That's more focused on the human side of things. I don't know when the next time we're going to see anything around automated vehicles in the Department of Transportation specific rules. I understand, though, that it could kick off at the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter, and that would actually start the process of moving forward with these rulemakings, more public engagement on these issues, which will be very welcome if it happens.
From a labor perspective, President Biden signed an executive order in April 2021 establishing the White House Task Force on Worker Organization and Empowerment. Will that impact what you're describing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is one of those things where they're going to want to do a lot of the legwork on this before moving ahead with some of the other issues. And some of this is good for everybody. There's this long-needed study on the issue of truck driver paid and unpaid detention time, how much time they sit waiting for their load. As you know, truck drivers are paid typically by the mile, not by the hour. And so if they're not turning their wheels, they're not generating revenue for themselves. And there's not really an incentive for shippers to move quickly if a truck driver pulls up to a bay and is ready to get their load. The shipper doesn't pay anything to have them sit there and wait. So they'll have them wait and have them line up so that they can maximize their efficiency, not the efficiency of the truck driver or of the supply chain as a whole. So this is going to be something that actually will bring on the economic incentives to move to autonomous trucking, but it is good for truck drivers as a whole. So that's going to be a part of it. But also it's about a larger issue around wanting to bring on more unionized jobs in the trucking segment. This is a stated push of what they want to do, and to try and make sure that they can really bring together all the tools that they think truck drivers need to become unionized. This is part of that effort. And so they want to sort of combine these things. But as part of that, certainly we've seen organized labor that's taken a position against autonomous trucking because of, in my opinion, unfounded fears about what it could mean for their jobs. But because they're taking this push around normal conventionally driven vehicles, that will certainly delay any sort of move on autonomous trucking rules, because there's been such a long-standing opposition to it from organized labor in particular. And so they're not going to want to move ahead of that going into an election year, for example.
Haven't they learned their lesson, or they're going to learn their lesson at the ballot box in the midterms? You look at the Port of LA, the Port of Long Beach, the Port of San Pedro. You see containers lined up. You see ships off the port. Goldman Sachs reported at one point it's over 52 ships waiting to get into the ports. Children did not get their Christmas gifts because of supply chain. Children 6, 7, 8, 9 years old knew what a supply chain was. Santa couldn't build it with the elves. To me, you're going to have a lot of angry moms that couldn't get their child a gift, and it's going to have issues at the ballot box, and they're going to vote these individuals out. So as they try and put the quote-unquote tools needed to ensure their agenda, won't they look back and say, wait a second, we tried this all with the ports. It failed miserably. Why don't we look at this from an innovative approach, embrace autonomous trucking, because autonomous trucking will create jobs. It'll be good for the U.S. economy. And oh, by the way, knock, knock, White House, autonomous trucking will help to lower inflation because goods can move. Autonomous trucks do not get COVID. When do we see that? Wait a second, this is good for the economy. Oh, wait a second, this could potentially move up my job approval ratings because I'm starting to squash inflation.
Well, I think it's about how much people pay attention to these issues. Certainly, you know that with organized labor, they're paying attention and their members are being fed information about any sort of actions they take on this. So you have a group of people that is actively engaged and participating on it. I think for the public as a whole, there's still a surprising lack of understanding of where autonomous trucks are and what they're capable of and on what timeline. Recently I saw a survey that indicated that even the most well-known autonomous trucking companies hit an awareness of only about 1 out of every 3 among trucking industry companies. So there's not a whole lot of understanding of who the big players are and what they're capable of. This may be lost on you and me because we talk about this and live it every day. But even in the trucking sector, only 1 out of 3 really understand who the big players are. And then outside of the circles that talk about these things all the time, we saw that in the recent Partnership for Automated Vehicle Education and J.D. Power, an associate survey, showed that the public as a whole, 2/3 of them know very little or nothing at all about any type of automated vehicle. And even those that thought they knew a great deal were often wrong about what they thought this technology was. So to your point, I don't think people understand the real impacts that this technology can bring to the supply chain. I do think it's a conversation mostly around wonks and those interested parties that are active and engaged. I think despite best efforts and what people see and what are interested in, they're not really hearing and seeing that much. We're not breaking through some of the normal, partners that run articles and analysis and survey on this. I think the public as a whole doesn't really understand what's possible, what's coming in the near future, and how this technology can benefit them. So I think that's one of the things that has to change, this understanding, before people will actually put pressure on the administration or the Congress to move forward with anything that can help the deployment of it. Now, I will say the thing that could change that is if we see China or even Europe or someone else jump out and start to take the lead in this for real. Because then you start looking at Americans losing jobs, losing economic opportunity. Then they don't have the control and the barriers they can put on U.S. deployment. The technology will develop elsewhere. And then instead of the U.S. leading the way on the development of this technology and capturing those economic benefits, it's the Chinese that are. And suddenly we have Americans buying, Chinese autonomous vehicles, not American autonomous vehicles. And so any sort of concerns around timelines or deployments or impacts of unionized labor or anything like that, those won't be listened to because it'll just be a product made elsewhere that people will buy. And so we'll lose the ability to capture the upside. Keep in mind, 3/4 of unionized workers support autonomous truck development happening in the U.S. So they want those jobs, right? when you ask them about it that way, they're fully supportive. It's just in general, they're like, well, we don't know what this can mean for truck drivers. And so that's sort of the balance of concerns with the interested parties.
3/4 of unionized labor supports autonomous trucks being built in America. Did I hear that correctly? It's smart. They understand outsourcing and what it could do. Outsourcing has decimated the unions. There's no denying that the facts are there. If you're going to outsource it to China, then you got the cybersecurity issue, which is a whole canary in the coal mine. We're outsourcing electric vehicles to China now with the minerals and the refining of the minerals. 90% of the minerals for electric vehicles are refined in China. Okay, well, that's a political problem. That we need EVs, but nobody's talking about the political angle of this. But I'm very proud to say I'm watching Monday, January 3rd, an episode of CNBC, and they're giving their stock picks for 2022. And several of the panelists on the Fast Money halftime show picked the autonomous driving sector. I was so proud. I said, holy cannolis. That's a Phil Rizzuto one there for you. Wall Street's picking up on this technology. Is that the first step when Wall Street starts picking it up? More companies go public, they get indexed in ETFs, and they start to go into more and more portfolios. Retail investors, not the Reddit crowd, but the buy and hold crowd says, wait a second, this is the future of this technology. Do we start to see that? Because if you look at history, we saw that with Netflix, we saw it with Apple, we saw it with Google, now Alphabet, we saw it with NVIDIA, we saw it with Activision. You can go down the line of all these names that the retail investors started because they liked their products. Does this go back to the whole Peter Lynch theory? Know the product, like the product, use the product, buy the stock? And for autonomous trucking, it delivers your goods, so I want to buy the company that ensured the Santa Claus could come to my house? Is that kind of going to be that first step?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, I really like the way you put all of that. So certainly we've seen a huge uptick in the amount of investments happening in this technology, even recently. I mean, we're looking at billions and billions in just the last few years. I think over 10 billion in just the last few years alone that have been invested in these technologies. But as you look at this, you're also looking at these Wall Street and some of the big investors are looking at ways they can essentially green their supply chains, right? And so they have to find ways to show that they're making progress on emissions, whether it be scope 1 or scope 3 emissions. If you look at how the U.S. is trying to comply with some of the world standards on this, on greenhouse gas emissions, they have to find ways to reduce their carbon footprint. And so you're seeing some of these index investors like your Vanguard, like your BlackRock, they're putting an emphasis on this. And so companies that can provide these technologies that reduce the carbon footprint, I know you've seen the recent Boundless report that showed that Locomation's technology and our approach can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by over 20%. Those companies that can bring on technology solutions like this will get more funding as well. So this will open up the floodgates for additional investment, for additional valuation, for additional spotlight on this technology and what can it bring, because you have the real impacts it can mean for carriers and shippers to be able to lower the cost of shipping their goods and to have greater consistency, greater turnaround, greater flexibility in the delivery of these goods. But also some of these secondary people, these companies and investors that don't typically care about this stuff, if you have Coca-Cola and Starbucks and Walmart, you name it, that have to reduce their footprint and whose CEOs or paychecks are tied to the reduction of their greenhouse gas footprint, you're going to start to see more and more attention being paid to technology solutions like this that can do that. And so you're able to break through our little ecosystem of transportation that just cares about this and start seeing that snowball effect elsewhere where others start to see what's going on and start to realize what this technology can mean for their operations or investments. So it's going to be exciting. I think this next year is going to really start opening that door and to get greater awareness of this technology with the greater public through their money.
The ESG trend is only going to continue. This thing is hot, 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 and it's going to continue. You're starting to see it indexed on Google. You're starting to listen to earnings calls where it's brought up. And so you have that on the Wall Street side, but then on the academic side, and I got a deep respect for MIT. Some of the most brilliant, amazing people I've met have gone to MIT, and MIT's estimating that 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions are made by freight transportation. I repeat, that's 8%. That's a large chunk of the pie. Well, as MIT does research, Carnegie Mellon does, where your founders came from, does research around this, and more universities do. Will this come more and more to the through front, and for companies like yours where it's 22% reduction compared to traditional Class A trucks, does that create a competitive advantage for Locomation going into the future?
Yeah, it really does. That 8% number is good. Another way I've heard it be put is that transportation sector as a whole represents 28% of total greenhouse gas emissions, and heavy duty trucks account for 23% of that. So if you have 1/4 of all emissions, transportation, 1/4 of that is trucking, and then you have a solution that can reduce that footprint by 20%, you see real impacts, and you see why people would gravitate around this. And one thing that's interesting is you've also seen other studies that haven't been independently verified that show that other autonomous trucking companies are looking at, I don't know, 10 to 12% fuel savings based on that technology. But when you bring on some of the additional technologies around convoying and the ability to get aerodynamic efficiencies off of vehicles drafting off of each other, that's how you get the 22% that we're looking at. So if you're saying, well, this technology can do 10%, this technology can do 22%, it's a clear competitive advantage, because this is going to be something that this administration and frankly other administrations around the world are trying to put a price tag on this to make more people feel the cost of emissions and pollutions and greenhouse gases emitted as a whole. So there's going to be a few different ways this impacts it. One is just the bottom line of being more efficient. Two is there's going to be additional prices put on any sort of carbon emissions in the coming years. And we see that with upcoming rulemakings led by EPA and NHTSA, the CAFE updates for heavy-duty vehicles that are coming. But you also see this in the very simple thing that, even I can understand with my Alabama education. Companies that use technology that saves them 18% on fuel efficiency are companies that have to spend 18% less on fuel. And so you're seeing an immediate cost advantage. They cannot care about saving the world at all. That can just be happy bystander. They can just care about saving money. This technology gets them both. And so it's one of those sweet spots where you find that the economic incentives line up with the policy incentives. And so it's really a nice place to be.
Is autonomous trucking the best way to decarb the freight transportation supply chain?
I mean, it's really interesting because the other side of that question would be, do you have to push for electric vehicles? And there are questions about California looked at mandating that every autonomous vehicle would be an electric vehicle. And certainly there's pros and cons to that. I don't think it necessarily makes sense this decade. And certainly I'm for tech neutrality, to where you let what technology makes sense play out and let the market dictate it. But even with things like electrification, there's lots of issues that have to be worked out. I mean, you've got battery durability, the range that the vehicles can go, the charging time, not only the durability of the battery, but the long-lasting durability. How many years will that last? And then what do you do with the batteries when they've outlived their useful life? And there's greening issues on the end of life side of that, but also the issues that you have on the leading side, trying to get the rare earth materials mined, and all of the economic impacts and environmental impacts, that come there. So I do think that automation and autonomous trucks have one of the best near-term, really, limited scope, limited problems, ways of reducing greenhouse gases, because it's all about using the systems that you have more efficiently, right? You're not going to dig up something else to do something. You're using everything you've got more efficiently. And that's what makes us one of the best tools in the near term for reducing greenhouse gases, and something that can play out in the long term, really incentivize the overall turnover into electric fleets or alternative fuel fleets, anything like that. You leave the door open for the best technology that can be developed in the future to be the one that's used, instead of trying to mandate an outcome by mandating the approach to it. So I think that the market's going to have a lot to say with this, but I think that if you want to encourage a reduction in pollution, a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and frankly, an increase in valuable jobs and economic impact, one of the best ways to do that now is to embrace autonomous trucking technology.
Because there's not a one-size-fits-all to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Electric vehicles work great in city centers. They work great sub 200 miles. They work great for school buses, for commuting, but they do not work great for long-haul trucking. That's the issue that has to be overcome. There's no doubt about it. It's diesel. It's going to be that. Maybe it'll be hydrogen fuel cell in the future, but that's going to be an infrastructure play. But right now, there's a clear way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, do good by society, good by the environment, and oh, by the way, give your shareholders and investors great returns on that because you can expand your profit margin. So to me, that's a win-win-win. It's like a really great apple pie with vanilla ice cream on top. It's a complete win-win. They go together, and it's delicious. Because you brought up the Alabama thing. So Alabama's great. So I got to say, I went to the Orange Bowl, and I saw Georgia absolutely decimate University of Michigan. So good luck in the national championship, because that's going to be a shootout between Georgia and Alabama. And I think Saban's got something up his sleeve, but I know how you feel about that.
Yeah, well, roll tide. I did end up watching the SEC championship game at a friend's house who went to Georgia, and they were just so confident they were going to win. It was very difficult for him to have to deal with me still being in his house by the end of the game. So we have no plans to watch the next game together. I think we're going to just do that from the safety of our own homes. I can't say that I can walk into it thinking the outcome's going to be as good as that, but probably everyone didn't tune in to hear about how great Alabama football is. But if you want to keep talking about it, I'll go all day.
When you look at technologies that individuals thought were great, and then you look at them and say, well, not so sure. There's a member of the cabinet, U.S. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh. On October 20th, 2016, this is when he was the mayor of Boston, Massachusetts, home of MIT. He signed an executive order welcoming autonomous vehicles to Boston. He is widely regarded as pro-autonomy. World Economic Forum is singing his praises. That was 6 years ago. Today, he's now Labor Secretary under President Biden. Has that pro-autonomy stance changed for Secretary Walsh?
Well, it shouldn't have, but obviously the world around the secretary has changed since 2016. When Anthony Fox, the Democratic Secretary of Transportation, that was the year he put out his first automated vehicle guidance that was generally supportive of the technology. It took a different approach. But then after that, after 2016, when Secretary Chow took over, she issued numerous guidance documents, numerous rulemakings, really just very active, driving the field and driving the conversations around the future of autonomous vehicles and autonomous trucking. I feel like that sort of as your natural partisan reaction to how active she was in this area, you saw trial lawyers and unionized labor and everybody come out against that, in part because of legitimate concerns they have, but also in part because of politics. And so those mindsets have hardened, I feel like, in a way that doesn't necessarily have to make sense. And so in 2016, you had Democrats that were leading in the development of this technology because of all of the impacts to safety, to emissions, to the economy, to equity that this technology can bring. And then, your Republican or right of center administration really embraced it so much that all the critics of that administration had to find a way to differentiate how the administrations were treated differently. And in my opinion, we were doing it the right way. And so if you pivot from that, you have to figure out how to do the same things, but call it something different. And so I hope that they're still on that path. They seem to have taken some changes in how they're handling the rulemakings and the like. But I think that when you look at Secretary Walsh, he's at the Department of Labor now, and he's hearing from the AFL-CIO Transport Trades Division. He's hearing from the Teamsters. He's hearing from some of these other groups that are just worried about what this can mean for the truck driver. And so he's having to sort of play to them, to play to that base that is, very supportive of this administration. And so even though he understands the value of it, and even though he was once more supportive of it, some of the positions the left and center groups have, opposed it, and they'll get back around supporting it, I believe. But because of that, it's a lot of the verbiage and some of the initial actions, like, some of the Department of Labor guidance around how you pay drivers that's changing. That ultimately will be beneficial for autonomous trucking, even though they're not necessarily intending it to be. But it's one of those things that I think it'll come back around. It's just some of those very basic, well, they like this, so we have to change the way we do it type approach that you see with changing of pretty much every administration. So I hope it's a growing pain that he'll be able to grow out of. As we mentioned, that progressive poll that showed in Morning Consult that I saw that showed that 75% of unionized labor supports autonomous vehicles because they want to work on the technology. It's just about making sure that those voices are heard and the benefits that this technology can bring can be felt by everybody. It's making sure that that message gets across to the secretary as well. And so maybe we'll have an opportunity in these upcoming rulemakings and listening sessions and the like to get that message out there. I think it's going to be key for 2022.
One would hope so, because then Mayor Walsh did a lot of really wonderfully positive things for Boston as it relates to autonomous vehicles. He welcomed autonomy with open arms, and Boston really started in Cambridge, developed into a hub for this technology. That when the students would graduate from Harvard and MIT and Boston College and BU, they were able to go into high-paying jobs without having to leave Boston, which, for the record, is a fantastic city. I want to say this. We cannot let politics define the future of autonomy. I'll say it again. We cannot let politics define the future of autonomy. This technology will do good by society. It will do good for shareholders. It will do good for the world. And it's not just me. In 2016, then Mayor Walsh stated the following when signing the executive order. Put this into the record. Autonomous vehicles have the incredible promise to deliver safer streets and a more reliable, equitable, and sustainable transportation system. But that will only occur with the right technology and the right policies in place. A very honest statement, very level-headed statement, where then Mayor Walsh saying, let's figure this out and let's do it right. And during his tenure as mayor of Boston, he did a bang-up job, and he did it right to encourage these companies to relocate to Boston and to deploy in Boston and eventually commercialize in Boston. With that being said, what policies now is the Secretary Walsh, U.S. Secretary of Labor, can he put in place now to build on the success that he had in Boston? Because Boston was the leader in this technology during his tenure in terms of deployment and commercialization.
Yeah. So regarding Boston, it's interesting because I read a Pittsburgh study recently that showed that the players developing autonomous technology in Pittsburgh could have a $10 billion impact and create 5,000 jobs over the next 5 years or so. And that's certainly true if you look at the impact Locomation has had itself, because we've tripled in size this last year, and we're going to continue to skyrocket in growth. And we're just one company out of many that's in this space that's growing. And so I'm sure Boston's seeing the same impact. And those students coming out of Harvard and MIT, what they can do for that city when they can stay there, it's got to be something along the lines of what Pittsburgh's seeing. So just the economic impact of the technology being developed is great. So if you look at the tools that the Department of Labor has, certainly they have their interpretation and their work they're going to do around driver pay and whether or not a driver has to be paid for being in the vehicle, even if they're not driving. I think they're going to come down to say, yes, if there's a driver present, they got to be paid. But also, there's a huge need. There's workforce shortages across the U.S. And one of the main areas that we see that is in STEM jobs. And one of the things that has been bipartisan, and bless it, I hope it stays bipartisan, is the apprenticeship approach that the Secretary seems to be leaning in on. And so if you have this great shortage, you have lots of people that need jobs. You have people that need to be trained up for new jobs. You have a shortage of people that can handle some of these robotics and engineering and automation and autonomy and software-based jobs. People get freaked out when they think about these things, but some of them are as simple as skills you need that you would get from shop in high school, right? That's some of the skills you need to start out working with these companies. And so this apprenticeship approach, where you can bring people on and get them trained up for the job that you want them to have, instead of saying that if you're not qualified today, you can't work with us. Being able to encourage that further can open the door to bring more people into these jobs and to open the door for more people to be able to enjoy the benefits these technologies can bring. And certainly it can alleviate any concerns that a driver would have about losing their job in the future. Although we've gone and done a lot of studies that show that no driver today should be worried about losing their job due to automation. That's just not the way the market's structured. The ability to use the tools that the Department of Labor already has to bring on more people to take these high-paying good jobs, these STEM jobs, working with these companies, I think that's the greatest thing he can do to help unemployment in the country, to help this shortage of people in STEM jobs, and to overall boost the economy of the U.S. as a whole. So hopefully that continued focus there that really does line up in a nonpartisan way with everyone's priorities, that I think is something that we can all lean in on.
Apprenticeships are a lost art. It's something that it's been throughout history, going back to the Middle Ages, where trained to be a knight or a swordsman or a samurai. It all started with apprenticeships. We need more apprenticeships to come back, because you can learn stuff. It's, we're both fathers, and you read a book to your child and they ask you a question, then they go read another book, and perhaps when they get older they read it on their own, and you're reading about some part of history and they start bringing up history questions like, okay, this works. It's like daddy, daughter, apprenticeship in the house. And that can happen because not only it's what you learn life skills from all those individuals. They've seen things that you've never seen. They can help you avoid the pitfalls. It's really something special that we need more of in America. What is the best way to get apprenticeships? Locomation's creating new jobs. You're based in the wonderful city of Pittsburgh, and I got to give a shout out to Brandy Brothers. Incredible sandwiches if you're in Pittsburgh. Does Locomation have an apprenticeship program, or is your company engaging with these individuals that might not know about trucking, but they're really interested in the technology and they have the skill set, and more importantly, and the most important, they want to learn?
Yeah. So there's a few ways. The short answer is yes. There's a few ways to answer that. First of all, we're growing very quickly. And so, as I mentioned, we just now, I think we're over or right at 100 people now. So we're growing quickly, but we're going to be growing even more. And so it's about trying to get the recruiters and the tools out there to capture the attention of people that would be interested in these jobs, and to bring them in and help them understand what's needed and what's preferred and what can we work with them on. And so we're doing a better job of going beyond the bounds of some of the normal recruiting tools and chains and workshops and job fairs, so that we can bring on more people that can take on different roles. Because not every job needs a PhD at Locomation or at any of the other companies in this space. A lot of them, some of them can even be done with just a high school degree. And if you start looking at the types of jobs and what people actually do, there is a lot of opportunity for people to come on and then to grow into further job in hardware development, or anything involving certainly driving the truck, but as well as some of the maintenance of the truck and taking care of it, and some of those other areas that you don't always think of. These are jobs that exist and that people can take advantage of, and there'll be more and more opportunities. And the segment as a whole is growing hugely, and we're seeing partnerships with community colleges and other university organizations to try and expand the pool of people that can take on these jobs. And then, of course, I got to put in a plug for organizations like Best Robotics, which I'm a board member of, that is focusing on starting to inform and engage the pipeline of students from grade school up to college that can take on these roles. And by engaging in a robotics competition, they get the skills training they need and the demystification of what a job in automation means, so that they can be more comfortable with these roles. And even if they're not going to be, software engineer or anything like that, understanding what it is and being able to take on the complementary jobs that enable the ecosystem. I mean, there's a lot to be said there, and there's a lot of opportunities there. So it's going to be something that there's steps to take today, but also over the course of the next decade, there's going to be lots of work to do.
Do you think one of the deterrents for individuals that are not looking at autonomous trucking, they see, there's an 80,000 truck driver shortage. Why do I want to go in an industry that's going to go kablooey and go belly up? Do they kind of just see the headline and not really go into the technology? Is that having any sort of negative impact?
So, I mean, if you look at the shortage, I would say it's not as much about a lack of getting people interested in the jobs. It is, many of these major trucking companies have over 100% turnover every year in the truck drivers that come in and go. And so it's not as much an issue with getting people interested. We see even greater levels of interest of those people that are interested in working with automation technology that can make the job safer and more efficient and can ultimately make them more money. There's more interest in that. It's that the way the sector lines up today, people are interested in joining and interested in the upside, but then they find all the downtime, all the limitations on where and when and how they can drive. All the time they find themselves stuck waiting for a load or having to drive an empty truck, deadhead miles as they call it, where they're not moving a load, but just driving from one place to the other so they can go pick up their next load. There's lots of inefficiencies in the system that we can use technology to help address. And when you do that, you make these jobs better for the drivers. And so you make them more likely to stay around. It's not a problem with getting them involved. It's a problem with keeping them interested and keeping them, wanting to take these jobs and to stay in these jobs. So that's really where the biggest impact can be for the technology. And that's where this technology can have the greatest impact on driver retention. So yes, you're right. If somebody was to see a headline to say, will driverless trucks take over, they can say, well, I don't want that job because it's going to be taken by an autonomous truck. The reality is different, and the reality of what they face today is different than what the perceptions are. So we really have a lot to do to inform and educate them on what this technology can do to make their jobs better. And frankly, I think this is something that the White House is going to spend a lot of time doing this year highlighting the issues with driver turnover and trying to draw some transparency into some of the shortcomings on areas where they're not paid. I mean, the top reason why drivers leave is because of pay issues.
With what you said, will the White House do what the news media is refusing to do and offer autonomous trucking as a solution? Will those lips ever roll off President Biden's mouth, or am I just in a pipe dream?
Until you can get the Teamsters and AFL-CIO and organized labor to really endorse it for, all of the right reasons, I don't think the White House is going to go out there with anything that can show support, like overt support, either going into the midterms or going into the presidential election. I think that they're going to be asking for guidance from organized labor first before they take any steps, in my opinion.
Will a right-of-center candidate flip the script, double down, say autonomous trucking offers a solution to lower inflation, which is pegged at over 7%, create new jobs and new jobs that are in America, and try and flip the script? Say, okay, you had your run, you didn't do this, you failed. This is our alternative solution?
I think that could happen. I think it's too soon for anything like that to happen because the public as a whole doesn't know this technology yet, and so they don't necessarily trust it. So, again, when you get outside of our circles, the public understanding of what autonomous technology is so limited that I don't think that they're going to really rally around it. And so I also think, from my own selfish point of view, I hope that doesn't necessarily happen because I don't want this to be a partisan issue. It's not that Republicans are for autonomous trucks and Democrats are for human-driven trucks. That's not how this works. And that's not some of the old lines around who unionized labor supports changed in 2016 and 2020. It's not what you always expected. And so organized labor and some of the blue collar labor force, they've changed. And so we saw that in their support of President Trump, and we're seeing that sort of shift now. So it's not, I don't want it to be a partisan issue. It can't get locked up in that. And I don't know that it's enough of a understandable rallying cry to get out of niche audiences for it to really be a front burner political issue. Now that may change, but I just don't think public sentiment is clear enough for politicians to really capitalize on it.
Spot on. We don't want it to be a partisan issue. That's not what I'm advocating for. We want it to be a good for America issue. This is what's good for America.
Amen. Yeah. It is that.
We want both sides to agree. So you mentioned trust. I've been on this kick for years now about building trust with autonomous vehicles and autonomous trucks. In your opinion, what is the best way to build trust with autonomous trucks? I like to play the honk game when I was a kid. Do autonomous trucks get equipped with the honk game? So a child's in the car and it goes, pulls the lever, honk, honk, and then they have, oh, Mom, that's cool, that autonomous truck, it's like it's out of a Pixar movie. Okay, now you just got trust with the next generation. How are we going to build that true trust?
I mean, people don't trust what they haven't seen or experienced. A lot of the skepticism comes from a lack of knowledge and exposure rather than any specific incident or thing that's happened in the past. In places where people have had the chance to interact with AVs, like in Pittsburgh, they have a higher opinion of them. So really, you need to put a greater emphasis on, pilots, demonstrations, ways people can interact with vehicles, or even ride in an AV to feel more comfortable. But in general, people today feel more comfortable with AVs moving goods rather than moving people. They do have concerns about understanding the intent of a vehicle without a human, as well as some basic concerns over technical failures. They also want to make sure that they understand. They just want to know what the vehicle is going to do, and there's lots of concern about that. I will say that people are 1.5 times more comfortable with the human-guided convoy model, like Locomations, than they are with regular autonomous trucking models. Actually, a majority of Americans in recent polls supported, and this was a Consumer Technology Association survey, the majority of Americans supported Locomations model versus other models, and it's 1.5 times more than the generic self-driving truck model. But it's also important to understand, like today, 53% of people say they feel less safe sharing the road with a self-driving semi-truck. Only 11% said they feel more safe. However, AAA found that 60% of people are worried about sharing the roads with conventionally driven trucks today. So 60% is higher than 53%. It's just about the way you ask people. People just don't like driving near trucks anyway. They're more afraid of the truck size than they are of the technology. And anecdotally, people also feel more comfortable driving near an automated driving system than they do near a teenager, someone who's clearly texting, or a very senior citizen. So it's just one of those things where people got to understand what the vehicles are. They got to understand when they're on the roads. I think ultimately, sometimes people just don't really care as long as it doesn't impact them. So if you're talking about trucks moving goods on the interstate and people don't have to see or hear it, but they can feel the impacts, the reduction in the cost of their goods, that's where they'll just be like, oh, good, I'm glad they're doing that. That's great. Yeah, I didn't know that's happening. Cool. And I think that's where the opportunity is, right? Make sure the people that care know, but the people that don't care, just let them feel the benefits.
They'll feel the benefits when they go to the grocery store and their grocery bill is cheaper. They'll feel the benefits when Santa Claus shows up with the toys. They don't have to explain to their child what a supply chain is and global outsourcing, and why Santa Claus and the elves couldn't magically build the Polly Pocket or the latest, hottest RC racer toy that they might have wanted. When we look to build public trust, and National Safety Council has done good work on this, distracted driving kills more people. Don't know the numbers, not going to say a number, but it is an absolute disaster how many people kill from distracted driving. Autonomous trucks are not going to get distracted. They're not going to be stressed out over a divorce. They're not going to be texting and driving. Oh, by the way, they're not going to get road rage and speed up and try and run you off the road like Mad Max did. All those notions of traditional truck drivers go away. So, does the industry come together and call up Bob Chapek over at Disney and say, Mr. Chapek, we like to make a Pixar movie about autonomous trucks, put smiley faces on them, and show how this technology is good? Is that where we're going to have to go?
If you lead us there, that's where we'll go, Grayson. I think it's interesting, but you make a good point. And so the numbers on distracted driving are hazy because they're generally derived from police reporting, and police officers have a good sense of when vehicles are speeding or when there was a drunk driver or somebody wasn't wearing their seatbelt. They have to sort of use their intuition to determine, or somebody else can report if there was distracted driving involved in the crash. Of the roughly 40,000 fatalities on American roadways last year, the estimated number was somewhere around 8,000 of them that involved distracted driving. So that's a significant number of crashes of all vehicles caused by distracted driving. And you've seen the stat that 94%, the critical factor of all roadway fatalities, 94% of it was caused by human error. Roughly a third of that is around speeding. A third of that is around drunk driving. A third of that is people not wearing their seatbelts. Obviously, there's overlap with these things. And then we also talked about distracted driving. And, regardless of whether or not you think roads should be designed differently or anything else, human factors are the critical reason, not the only reason in these crashes. And if you look at truck crashes, there's 5,000 large trucks involved in fatal crashes last year. Of that 5,000, about 850 of these fatalities were truck drivers themselves, which means the rest are people that were other road users, right? And those numbers are going up. So in 3/4 of the fatal truck crashes, the critical pre-crash event, to use the actual terminology for clarity, was another vehicle, person, animal, or object in the road, right? So 3/4 of the time, it had nothing to do with the truck driver themselves. That was not the critical reason. Of the final 1/4 of the time, so of that final fourth, 87% was caused by speeding, lack of sleep, inattentiveness, or aggressive driving. And so of that last fourth, almost all of it is caused by some mistake of the truck driver, But if you start removing those incentives or use technology to fix that, they're no longer allowed to speed. They're able to sleep in their cab while they're going, so they're getting more sleep than they would otherwise. They have driver monitoring systems to help with inattentiveness and human design to make sure they stay engaged in the task. You eliminate those reasons and you can start dropping that number, that 5,000 fatalities a year. You can drop it from both the truck drivers themselves, who have the fourth most dangerous job in the U.S., and the other road users that have nothing to do with the truck driver operation, but get caught up in these crashes. And so there's real safety impacts this technology can bring. And so I don't know how you wind that into a Disney movie, but I mean, safety is the critical reason why this technology is so important. You also have all the other secondary benefits, but the reason why this technology gets so much attention and so much love from Republicans and Democrats and Congress and the administration and elsewhere is because of what these technologies can mean to safety, efficiency, emissions reduction, and the economy if they're done right. to echo what Marty Walsh said, if they're done with good policies and good technology, which I think is something Secretary Chow would say too. If you do it right, they can do a lot of things, but you got to do it right.
If we do it right, autonomous trucks will make our roads safer. And to ask to how you tie it into a Disney movie, Disney movies always have death. You had the scene in Bambi, and there was a Pixar Disney movie about a dinosaur that passed away in the first 15 minutes. And watch this, my daughter, Daddy, why'd the mommy go away? We got to explain that. So to have an autonomous trucking Disney Pixar movie, you could start with a road fatality that goes into a solution with a happy ending. And there's your Disney plot. So you're taking a negative and a bad, and you're turning it into a positive. So there's your
hero's journey.
Disney plot.
Yeah.
You served 4 years as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Transportation Policy in the U.S. Department of Transportation. Fancy. Okay, so you served under Secretary Chow, who, for the record, did a phenomenal job. Did you uncover wonky people like me asking all these questions of how do you build trust, how do you build engagement, or was that you coordinating with the White House to figure out what is the best policy for the U.S.?
So, it's actually really interesting how often you find yourself in a situation where no one knows the answers when it comes to these new technologies, right? There's not somebody at the White House that knows better. May not be a career staffer that knows better. There may not be somebody in industry that knows better yet. And so it's really focusing on process and bringing the right people in together to have these conversations to shape it. Because, I think one of the benefits that I had, I came in to DOT, I was super young. I was like 30 years old. And I knew, you had the assumption, everybody had the assumption that I didn't have all the answers, right? Which was a benefit because you get some people that come in after, 40 years in the industry and everything else, and they're expected to have all the answers. Well, again, when it comes to automated vehicles and some of these innovative technologies, no one has the answers yet. So the benefit that I had is I could humbly and legitimately ask all these questions up and down, left and right, bring people in. And there was no problem with humility there because everybody knew I didn't know the answers. No one assumed otherwise. And so I could ask all sorts of dumb questions, and it was wonderful. That is something, the humility in approach is something that I think you got to have, whether it's forced upon you or not. Because I think if you can't ask those questions and you can't bring people in with all sorts of opinions and all sorts of levels of expertise, if you're only relying on yourself, you're in trouble because things change too much. There's too many different types of questions. There's too much going on for any one person to assume they have all that information, or any one insular office at DOT to do that. So I think some of the things I learned about understanding the role of different levels of government, the importance of knowing who does what levers are actually available to impact policy outcomes, and what's even legal. I think there's the assumption that government regulators, the executive branch, is much more powerful than it is. And in reality, you have to be much more nuanced in your approach and clever in how you try to shape things, because you're not often given a mallet. And if you're given a mallet, typically what you needed was a screwdriver. So you just have to figure out how to work through a process to get where you need to go, and understand that you likely won't get credit for it, and people will criticize you every step along the way. Secretary Chow certainly saw that in her 4 years there.
I don't know how she did it. She got a bow and arrow from here, a shotgun from there, a firearm this way, but she, no pun intended, kept on trucking. Good for her. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, going into Wonkyville here. On January 1st, 2022, FMCSA Administrator Meera Joshi resigned. Her nomination advanced out of the Senate Commerce, Science, and Technology Transportation Committee. In October, never got approved by the full Senate. Why did she resign?
Yeah, that's crazy. The short answer is I don't know either. It could have been that there was a secret hold on her confirmation that no one really knew about. Certainly had some of the outright holds on everybody from DOT, but I wouldn't think that the hold would be the reason on it, because she was already the deputy and already working there. You think about what that job means and the fact that it's not all powerful, and that with all the White House action and dictates around labor and supply chain, could have been, some of these things are things you'd expect her to work on. Could have been that she was sort of left without a voice on the action or marginalized on these things, and so it wasn't really able to do much. That speculation. It could be the plain, simple desire to go back to working in New York City in a pretty good longer-term position that she took, instead of having 1 foot in DC and 1 foot in New York. You always hear the old saying like, "Oh, they went to go spend more time with family." sometimes that's true, and she's still working. And certainly, she made a big decision that impacts future opportunities for her to turn down a Senate confirmation and to sort of spurn the Biden-Harris administration and Secretary Buttigieg. It's an interesting move and shows, what she must be thinking about in her own future. I was very surprised because it seemed like she was in the right place at the right time with sort of the right background to execute on this administration's vision for what her role should be. So I don't know. I was surprised by it.
A lot of us were surprised, and Eric Adams was sworn in as mayor of New York City midnight on January 1st. Maybe she's betting on an Adams administration. I mean, that could be. He's flying high right now. We'll see in 3 or 4 years, but perhaps she's betting on an Adams administration. Who knows? It's a great parlor game. Let's say that. I want to go back to Secretary Chow again. I had the honor and pleasure of meeting her once and had a really nice conversation about autonomous vehicles. So Secretary Chow, thank you for taking the time to chat with me about autonomous vehicles. I still remember it and I appreciate it. And I do have the photo to prove it, though it's not online. On December 7th, Secretary Chow, now in the private sector, she tweeted the following. Autonomous trucking can help address the strain on global supply chain issues we're facing today. Economic recovery is hampered as goods wait to be moved, partly due to the truck driver shortage that's only predicted to worsen over time. America's global competitiveness requires a 21st century freight logistics network that is flexible, resilient, and efficient. Spot on statement from Secretary Chow. In your opinion, what do you think the economic impact of the autonomous trucking industry will be on the U.S. economy?
Yeah.
You had a great mentor in Secretary Chow.
Yeah. No, I still love the secretary. I still get to talk to her from time to time. Often it's with an assignment, but you never stop working for the secretary. But if you look at what this technology can mean for the U.S., so today, trucks carry 70% of freight in the U.S., and this amount's expected to increase by over 22% in the next 20 years, right? Everybody understands the increasing demand of freight. And the total size of the market right now is $800 billion, with most of that, $670 billion, being in the long-haul market. We talked about the impact of local areas that can embrace this technologies, 10 billion and 5,000 jobs over the next 5 or so years, but also on the nationwide impact. Autonomous trucking technology is expected to increase total employment by 26,000 to 35,000 jobs per year on average. And the transition is going to increase annual earnings for all U.S. workers by over $200. So when you think about that and you think about, well, why would this be? You look at the efficiencies that can be gained in the system. We already talked about that today's system has lots of inefficiencies baked in that really impact the supply chain. But when you start looking at the ability to get your goods to market faster, when you start looking at the reduction in cost to get your goods to the market, when you start talking about a reduction in spoilage because, farmers' goods aren't sitting on a dock somewhere or stuck on the road while the driver's sleeping because they're only allowed to go 11 hours a day. When you start reducing these points of friction, you start making it easier for Americans to win in the global market. And so that's why when you look at the overall economic impact, it's hugely positive for those that can take advantage of this because it'll lower that price. It'll get more American goods out to the domestic market and the world market. So American goods beating out foreign competitors to the U.S. market and American goods getting out further to markets around the world because we've lowered the cost of transportation. We've seen this in the past. We've seen how it can reshape the world. If we understand what this can do and understand how the U.S. can take advantage of it with some of our advanced manufacturing technologies and the way we lead the world in the development of these advanced manufacturing approaches, we can take advantage of this and the United States economy can flourish as a whole. Secretary Chow has seen this. She saw that at Department of Labor and how you approach labor issues around the country. She's seen this at the Department of Transportation and the impacts that happen around the world when you lower the price of transportation. And so if we bring these lessons learned together and you start combining them, you can see how you can take advantage of this so that Americans can win out in the development of this technology and we can make Americans winners in the development and the impacts of what this technology can mean for everyone. It's a real opportunity for us to take advantage of it. And if we sit back and put up unnecessary barriers and everything. We're just saying, well, maybe China will be better off with these advantages, or maybe someone in Europe will be better off. We're ceding our leadership. And when you start ceding American leadership in technology, you start losing a lot of the additional benefits that Americans see as our country leads the world in technology.
The United States of America exported Google to the world. The United States of America exported Facebook to the world. America exports greatness. America exports incredibly well-built products by the hard men and women of this country. When you're exporting goods with a stable, efficient supply chain, you are doing good for the economy, you're doing good for America, and you're putting America in a leadership position, in a position of strength. That's where we need to be. America leads at its best when America leads from a position of strength. Finch, what is the future of autonomous trucking, and what role do you see Locomation playing in that future?
Yeah, so autonomous trucking will probably take longer than anticipated because of the new regulatory approach. I think the technology will be there certainly in the next year or two, but for you to be able to remove the driver, I think those rulemakings that have been added won't be completed until 2025, 2026, because they're also somewhat dependent on research that has been set up that's going to conclude in 24 and 25. And so, Locomation's role in this is interesting because we have a human-led two-truck linked convoy approach that we're going to be deploying before we get to that driverless model in the future. So we'll be able to get on the road and start realizing those efficiencies and making the gains and getting that experience next year as we move along. Or I guess I should say by the end of this year when we deliver our first trucks, and then next year as we see widespread deployment. We'll be able to get that on-road experience leading into that driverless future. I think that you'll be able to see some of these commercial motor vehicles that are autonomous operating at night and off-peak hours, so it'll make the driving experience better for everyone else. I think that you'll see them have dramatic impacts on the cost of goods and the ability of the U.S. to retake some of those manufacturing jobs lost elsewhere because we have the biggest market in the world still. I think you're going to see the benefits of the different approaches play out. In general, the U.S. succeeds because we have the best and brightest entrepreneurs in the world. We have an ecosystem that supports them, that doesn't dictate to them. When you compare this to the EU system that's a regulate and subsidize model that's dramatically inefficient, tries to pick winners and losers. And then you have the fully top-down approach of like China that just says, we're going to pick a national champion, we're going to pick the way to do it, and we're just going to fund it like crazy. It's interesting to see some of the seams coming apart around all of the deficit spending they've been doing. They start losing momentum, and then you start seeing like the crazy $100 million smart cities that they've done that have been poor bids that have gone in the wrong direction, but people thought it was progress, and they chose their technology and approach, and it's already proving to be a dramatic disaster. These government-led incentives and government-led programs don't work as well because they don't take a lot of the common sense things, and they're not as flexible and adapted. That's why the U.S. has the best ecosystem for entrepreneurship, because we let the innovators innovate, and we don't start with no. The best transportation development for the efficiency of our nation as a whole was Google Maps, because people were better utilizing the roadways and making them more efficient. It wasn't a government-led initiative. In fact, the government-led initiatives had failed around transit, and it was that failure that Google capitalized on and started taking advantage of and did it a better way because we didn't stop them, right? Because you were allowed to innovate in the U.S. and they were able to capture the benefits from this. I think that the American way, if we don't try and out-China by doing what they do, and if we don't try and mimic the EU with the subsidize and regulate approach, if we allow U.S. to lead with its strengths, it can lead the world in the development of technologies, and it can lead the world in more democratic, more prosperous approach as a whole. And so I think the American way has to win out. I think this is a marker for what it means to have the American approach to innovation, and I think it all ties together. So I do think it's important for us to win, and I think it's important for us to win in the American way. And so I hope to God that this current administration sticks with the American way. I think ultimately they will. I think they'll see the way to do it. They probably will take some steps that I would disagree with along the way. But for us to win at this, we have to do it the American way. And, we just all have to stay on top of it to make sure we do it right.
The American way is beautiful. It's prosperous. Free markets are beautiful and wonderful. And you can't say enough good things about democracy. This is a very fair country that is this most wonderful place to live in the world. And every day you wake up and you realize how lucky you are to live here when you see some of the atrocities that unfortunately take place around the world. But not here in America. We might have our indifferences. We might not agree on everything. But we can sit down and have a coffee or have an intellectual debate and walk away and shake hands and say, I'll agree to disagree. That's the beauty about America. And Finch, as we look to wrap up this really insightful conversation where we let innovators innovate, what would you like our listeners to take away from this conversation?
This next year is going to be very important. We have to make sure that people understand the reality of the capabilities and limitations of the technology, the reality of what it will mean for jobs and employment and equity, the reality of what it can mean for public perception and public acceptance of it, and the reality that, narratives shape reality. The press and the Congress can shape the reality of what this ecosystem and the administration can shape the reality of the ecosystem that autonomous trucking companies deploy in. So we need to make sure that the truth is heard, and, internet bros defending Tesla or whatever don't end up being the counterpoint that people work against. The good, responsible players in this space are able to demonstrate and to show and to talk about and to prove how they can safely deploy this technology. We have to make sure that that's heard, people understand that, and people get how this technology is going to be deployed safely. We can't let the narrative shape the reality. In this case, there's too much to lose. There's too much to lose for the safety, efficiency, economic benefit, and the like. And frankly, there's too much to lose in the future of democracy and making sure that our way of approaching this technology wins out and we don't let someone else take the mantle from the United States. I think it's a pivotal year for all that. I don't mean to tie it to all these grander things, but it's part of a larger narrative. And so we have to make sure we shape the reality with facts and with truth and not narratives and anecdotes. And so I think that's going to be the big challenge for 2022.
As Finch said, the United States must lead on all things autonomy. Our future depends on it because the future is bright, the future is autonomous, and the future is Locomation. Finch, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. This is fun. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte and Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte and Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.